Hello and welcome to another cozy mystery here on The Curios Case. I'm your host, Davis, always glad to share a quiet evening with you. Tell me, where in the world are you listening tonight? How was your day? I hope it ends with calm hearts and warm cups. Leave a little note below, and let's share this moment together. Now, let's begin tonight's story. Afternoon, light filtered through lace curtains. Soft, still, golden. It fell across the small table where Miss Marple sat, her knitting needles glinting with every slow turn of the wrist. The sound was gentle, rhythmic. Tick, click, pause. A quiet metronome to an ordinary afternoon. The kettle on the stove whispered faintly. A promise of tea. Somewhere beyond the window, a bird sang once and fell silent again. Everything was peaceful. Everything belonged. Miss Marple's sitting room held the smell of wool and lemon polish. The mantel clock ticked with stubborn precision 3:30. A time when nothing much ever happened in Street Mary Mead. That was how the village liked it. Orderly, predictable, contained. She looked at the vase of wildflowers on her table, freshly picked by young Tommy from next door. The stems crooked, the colors bright. A small sign that summer still clung to the edges of autumn. Miss Marple smiled faintly. There was comfort in patterns, in routines that kept life stitched together. Letters stacked neatly on the corner. A half-finished crossword beside her spectacles. The kind of quiet that wrapped itself around the day like a shawl. Outside, a cart rattled along the lane, hooves against stone. A man's voice calling faintly to his horse. Then silence again. Peace returned as if it had never left. She reached for her cup, found it empty, and rose slowly. Joints stiff, steps small but steady. The air near the window felt cool, touched with the faint scent of rain that had passed in the morning. She liked that scent. Clean, honest, familiar. From this spot, she could see the high street beyond the hedges. Mrs. Price Ridley fussing at the baker's. Colonel Linton pausing to tip his hat to Mrs. Bantry. Everything in its place. The village breathing in rhythm. Predictable, like the rows of her knitting. Yet even as she stood there, hands resting lightly on the sill, something shifted, something small, something that didn't fit the pattern. Her eyes narrowed. The front gate, always latched, was swinging slightly open. Back and forth, a slow, uneasy motion in the calm air. No wind strong enough to move it, no sound to explain it, and yet, there it was. A gate open when it shouldn't be. A detail so small, most would have ignored it. But Miss Marple never ignored small things. She stared for a long moment. The knitting lay forgotten in her lap. Her pulse steadied. Her mind, sharp as ever, began to turn. Something small had gone wrong, and she meant to find out what. The door wasn't as it should be. Not closed, not open, just resting, in between. A sliver of light cut across the floor. Still, sharp, wrong. Miss Marple froze mid-step. Her hand tightened on the doorknob. She listened. No sound came from the other side. Only the soft hum of the mantel clock, steady, unaware. She leaned slightly forward. The air felt colder here, different from the rest of the room. The faintest scent of starch and lavender drifted through. Her sewing room, she always left it shut. The latch glinted faintly in the afternoon glow. It hadn't caught. It never failed to catch. A habit, she thought. Old hands always made sure of small things. She pushed it just an inch. The hinge whispered. No wind, no draft. Just quiet space opening itself unwillingly. She waited again. Nothing moved. Nothing stirred. Even the ticking seemed to hesitate. Her eyes dropped to the carpet. A thread lay there. Red. Thin, torn at both ends. Not from her knitting. Not from anything she owned. She bent down, steady despite the faint ache in her knees. She touched it with a finger. Dry, smooth, freshly cut, not frayed by wear. Her pulse ticked once against her throat. Her gaze shifted toward the table. A cup sat there, half full, cold, the rim faintly smudged with lipstick. Not hers. The spoon inside tilted slightly. its handle glinting like a signal. Someone had been here, recently. She straightened slowly, eyes fixed on the cup. The faint ring of moisture around its base had not yet dried. That meant minutes, not hours. She glanced again toward the half-open door. The still air, the faint scent, the red thread. One by one her mind placed them in quiet order. No broken glass, no forced lock, no sign of violence. Just small things that didn't belong. She knew this pattern. The quiet wrongness before the noise of truth. Her hand rested on the table, light as a feather. She looked toward the hallway. Empty. Still. A single word escaped her lips, not fear, but thought. Strange. And then, very softly, she smiled, because strangeness, in Street Mary Mead, never stayed small for long. She turned toward the open door and stepped through the silence, not knowing yet what waited beyond. The room looked ordinary, but wasn't. Everything was neat, everything in place. Almost too much so. Miss Marple stood in the doorway, her eyes adjusting to the soft grey light that pressed through the curtains. Nothing stirred. No hum of a sewing machine. No low tune of a hymn, the one Miss Carter always hummed. Silence, thick as wool. Her gaze swept slowly across the room. The table by the window clean, polished, waiting. The iron on its sideboard stand unplugged. The chair slightly turned. A cushion pushed just out of line. Tiny things, barely visible. But to Miss Marple, they spoke volumes. She moved forward, quietly, each step careful not to disturb the story that the room had already begun to tell. On the table lay pieces of fabric folded, neat, square, colorful scraps of muslin and cotton stacked like slices of quiet life. A pincushion beside them, and the spool of thread red. Snapped, not cut. Her eyes lingered on that thread. The end was jagged, pulled apart with force. She noted it, stored it. It mattered. She turned slightly. The scissors lay on the floor, open, pointing away from the table, as if dropped, not placed. A small circle of thread lay around them like fallen petals. Then she saw the teacup, half full, untouched for hours, a faint ring where steam had once risen, cold, still. Time had stopped there too. Her hand rested on the edge of the table. The surface felt cool beneath her palm. Her eyes followed the edge of the fabric nearest the chair, and that's when she saw it. A hand. She froze. The breath caught silent. Then she stepped closer, steady, controlled. The woman sat slumped in the bride work chair, her back slightly bent, her head bowed as if dozing. But Miss Marple knew. No one sleeps like that. "Ellen," she whispered. No answer. Only the faint creak of the window pane. She circled slowly, her every movement careful. The face was pale. Still. Peaceful. Almost but too still to belong to the living. A single needle still threaded in her hand. White cotton gleaming faintly in the dim light. One final stitch. Never finished. Miss Marple's gaze moved to the table again. Among the fabric lay a piece of folded paper, half hidden under a square of lace. She didn't touch it. Not yet. But she could read the corner of one line. The ink dark. The handwriting bold. "Tonight, or I'll tell her everything." Her heart gave one quiet thud. She straightened, her face calm. Her mind already at work, gathering each piece, weighing each silence. No struggle, no blood. Just an unfinished stitch, a letter left in haste, and a life ended in perfect order. Miss Marple looked once more at the lifeless figure, then at the red thread lying across the floor. A single word passed her lips. Soft. Final. Not natural. The kettle in the next room hissed faintly as if to agree, and somewhere deep inside her the first thread of the truth began to pull. Miss Marple studied each detail. Quiet room. Quiet death. But quiet was only the surface. Thread snapped, not cut. Force, not patience. Something startled the hands. Scissors fallen, open, pointing away. Dropped in a hurry. Why hurry if alone? The chair turned slightly, not square to the table. Someone stood close, too close, teacup half full, cold now, a ring where warmth once was. Time marked itself. Curtains open, daylight work, no lamp pulled. So interruption came early. No overturned basket, no broken drawer, order everywhere. This was not theft. A letter corner showing. Folded, hidden, then abandoned. Bold hand. Few words. Hard words. Tonight, or I'll tell her everything. Blackmail, perhaps, or a warning. Either way, pressure. Tell her. Not tell them. A woman targeted. A woman feared exposure. Who is her? A wife? An employer? A lady of standing? The needle still threaded. Work paused mid-stitch. Ellen expected to resume. She did not. Face peaceful. Too peaceful. But peace can follow terror. Hearts break under strain. No marks on the wrists. No bruise on the throat. No struggle written loud. Only whispers. Whispers can kill. Red thread on the floor. Red spool snapped. Red clings. Red travels. Red remembers. If a visitor came, they wore gloves. Perhaps. Gloves gather thread. Gloves carry proof. She looked again at the door. No chisel marks. No forced latch. So Ellen opened it. Willingly. Why would she? A known caller. Familiar voice. No alarm at first. What about the timeline? Tea poured. Steam gone. An hour. Maybe 2. Before discovery. And the 2. Letter? Left in sight. A mistake. Or a message. Someone wanted it found. If the visitor feared exposure, they'd take the letter. Unless they couldn't find it. Unless a second letter exists. Ellen was careful. Careful people double-stitch. Careful people hide things twice. Miss Marple's gaze moved slowly. Edges, hems, linings, places where secrets live. Plain sight is a poor hiding place. She pictured the scene backward. Knock, door opens, soft voices, a sharper tone, a hand on a chair, a sudden tear of thread, a breath held too long, a heart that would not bear it, then silence, then order restored, a chair nudged, a cup left, a paper half hidden, but one thing still lacked. Motive lived in the shadows. Motive hides behind names, behind her. Miss Marple folded her hands. The mind tightened its thread. Follow the domestic things, she thought. They never lie. Begin with the visitor, known, trusted, afraid, then the secret, old, delicate, expensive. Which woman in this village would fear a seamstress and a single line of ink? Who tonight would dread a knock at her own door? Who is her? The village talked. They always did. At the baker's, Mrs. Price Ridley leaned close to the counter. Such a dreadful thing, she whispered. Heart gave out, they say. Poor soul. But, her voice dropped even lower, not the sort of woman to die suddenly, is she? At the post office, Mr. Pottle adjusted his spectacles. Saw the doctor's car, I did. Twice, mind you. Never comes that quick unless something's odd. He sniffed. Funny business. Very funny indeed. By the church gate, Mrs. Bantry stood with her basket. Heart trouble, was it? She asked the vicar's wife. So they claim. Though I heard the milk boy saw someone leaving her lane near noon. She gave a knowing look. Tall figure, hat pulled down. Not from the village. At tea, tongues warmed faster than the pot. They say she was expecting a visitor. Did you hear about the letter? Letter? What letter? Oh, there's always a letter. Laughter nervous. Shallows circled the cups like steam. Miss Marple listened quietly from her corner in the tier room. She never interrupted. Never corrected. She simply heard. Each word a stitch. Each pause a knot. She noted how quickly the story changed shape. In one version, Ellen died peacefully. In another, she was found holding a secret note. By dusk, someone had decided there'd been a quarrel. By morning, there'd be a scandal. That was how truth moved in street. Mary Mead slowly, like jam on a spoon, sweet enough to hide the bitterness underneath. Miss Marple folded her napkin neatly. Her eyes drifted to the street beyond the window. Children playing. A man walking too fast, a curtain twitching across the square. Nothing she hadn't seen before, yet something in the rhythm of the village felt uneven. She caught a few more scraps as she rose. The constable says she looked peaceful. Peaceful, yes, but so did poor Mr. Harris, and we all know. Shh, not here. Her steps slowed near the door, voices lowered. Someone said softly, "Miss Marple's bound to know what really happened." She smiled faintly. They always said that, and often they were right. Outside, the air was crisp. The lane smelled faintly of rain and flour. The world carried on washing, hung, bicycles rolled, gossip simmered. But underneath the ordinary hum, something else moved. Something small, hidden, breathing. Clues, she thought, live in talk. Not in evidence, not in papers, in tone. The way a voice softens when guilty. The way a lie needs company to stay alive. She turned toward the square, eyes calm, mind already threading patterns. Everyone was certain. No one was right. And somewhere in those whispers, the truth was hiding. She lifted the sewing basket. Ordinary. Plain wicker. The handle polished smooth by years of touch. It belonged beside Ellen's chair. It always had. Miss Marple set it on the table. The light caught on the lid. Something about the way it rested seemed off. Tilted slightly, as if replaced in a hurry. She unhooked the clasp. The hinge creaked softly. Inside, everything sat in careful order. Spools stacked by color, buttons sorted by size, needles aligned like soldiers. But one thing didn't fit. A small envelope lay folded beneath the thimble tray, unmarked, untouched by dust. She hesitated only a second, then slid it out carefully. It was thin, no address. Just a faint smudge in one corner, a fingerprint. She held it to the light. The outline glistened faintly, oily, recent. A man's hand, perhaps, too broad for Ellen's own. She turned the envelope over. The flap was torn, not lifted, opened without care. Someone in haste, someone not meant to be seen. Inside a single scrap of paper, half of a note, the torn edge rough, the ink pressed hard. She read what little remained. Cannot forgive, the truth must, and nothing more. Her breath steadied. Not grief. Calculation. The other half must exist somewhere. Someone tore it to keep a secret. Someone failed. She looked back inside the basket, every spool in place, except one. The red thread, the same shade as the one found on the floor, was nearly gone. Only a few loops remained. Cut sharply, not torn. She lifted the spool. A dark stain touched its rim, barely visible. She brought it closer. Not dye, not ink, blood, just a pinprick, where a finger must have bled, a sharp point, a nervous slip, but fresh enough to matter. She turned the spool slowly between her fingers. Her eyes narrowed. The inner core, the paper tube, had writing on it. Tiny letters, almost invisible beneath the thread. She unwound one loop. The words appeared, one at a time. 3 letters, bold, pressed by pencil. RVH. Initials, not Ellen's, not anyone she knew at first glance, but she repeated them under her breath. Names came and went through memory. Faces, too. The village had many secrets, but initials narrowed the search. RVH. She wound the thread back in place, her movements calm, measured. But her thoughts were racing quietly behind her eyes. A half note about forgiveness. A fingerprint too broad for a woman. A spool marked with another's initials. She replaced everything exactly as it had been, closed the clasp, ran her hand once across the lid, and whispered to the empty room. It wasn't chance. The basket sat silent, the air still cool, but the message had already spoken, and Miss Marple, without looking back, knew someone in the village was bleeding guilt. Miss Marple called on Mrs. Clara Linton, the first house on the lane, curtains drawn halfway, though it was still bright outside. A sure sign of worry. or guilt. Mrs. Linton opened the door quickly, too quickly. Her smile came late. "Oh, Miss Marple, how kind. Do come in." Her voice trembled, though the words did not. The sitting room smelled faintly of lavender polish. Everything tidy. Cups laid out before she arrived. A teapot steaming quietly on the tray. Prepared, yet nervous. Saturday tea poured. Miss Marple noticed the spoon clink twice against the cup. A tremor in the hand, small, but it stayed. "I heard about poor Ellen," Mrs. Linton said. Her eyes didn't meet hers. She was a good soul, worked hard, always polite. Her tone was smooth, too smooth. Miss Marple nodded. Yes, a very steady woman, not one for surprises. She stirred her tea slowly, watching the swirl. "Do you know if she had visitors lately?" The question hung like a thread. Mrs. Linton's spoon paused mid-air, a beat too long. Then, "Visitors? Oh no, not that I recall." She smiled again, softer. Now, Ellen kept to herself. Miss Marple tilted her head. "Indeed, though someone must have been with her yesterday." Her door was open, her tea still warm. A silence, long enough to count heartbeats. Mrs. Linton looked toward the window. Her throat moved as she swallowed. Then the faintest sound porcelain against saucer broke the pause. "Perhaps," she said. The postman lingered. "Or that young man from the shop." Her tone wavered just slightly. The first crack. Miss Marple set her cup down. "Ah, yes, the postman. Mr. Ridley's nephew, isn't he? Such a helpful boy. I expect he never forgets his deliveries." Her eyes didn't leave Mrs. Linton's face. A bead of sweat formed near her temple, quickly brushed away with a handkerchief. She forced a laugh. Yes, always prompt. He wouldn't forget." Miss Marple murmured. Her gaze dropped to the small table beside them. A spool of red thread sat there, out of place among the lace coasters. The same shade, unmistakable. Mrs. Linton noticed the direction of her eyes. Her hand moved quick, defensive to cover it. "Oh, that from mending my sleeve earlier. Nothing at all." Her tone rushed now, words tumbling. Miss Marple only nodded. "Of course," she said softly. "Nothing at all." They spoke of other things then. Weather, church flowers, trivialities meant to patch the cracks. But the tremor in Mrs. Linton's hand never stopped. When Miss Marple rose to leave, Mrs. Linton walked her to the door. The smile returned. "Such a comfort having you near," she said. Her voice trembled again. Miss Marple's eyes softened. "Comfort is a curious thing," she said. "It often visits those who need it most." The door closed quietly behind her. No wind, no sound, just a faint click, like a heartbeat held too long. Miss Marple stood on the step. The red thread still burned in her mind, and in that silence she knew. One thing for certain, Mrs. Linton was afraid. A pattern appeared, small, quiet, deadly. Miss Marple sat at her writing desk. Notes spread like puzzle pieces. Red thread, half a note. Fingerprints, initials RVH. Each clue had weight, each pointed backward, to something old, something buried. Letters, money, fear, the holy trinity of village secrets. Ellen had been a seamstress for decades. She worked in homes where curtains hid more than dust, where quiet hands mended torn lace and overheard broken promises. And in those years, she had learned far too much. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. RVH. The initials pressed like ghosts on her memory. Then it came Reverend Victor Hargrove. Retired, respected, widower, still living on Church Lane. He'd served the parish for 30 years, preached peace, collected donations, and quietly borrowed more than faith could repay. She recalled whispers from years back. Funds missing from a charity box. Clerk dismissed. A widow blamed. The matter dropped, quietly, with no record. Now Ellen's death, and those letters. She took the torn scrap again from the envelope. Cannot forgive. The truth must. Forgive who? Tell what truth? Ellen's handwriting had been tidy, strong. This was not hers. This was written to her. Someone warning, or begging. Miss Marple thought of Mrs. Linton's tremor. Her husband, dead these 5 years, a banker's clerk, dismissed. Unfairly, they said. The same year the church fund vanished. A thread pulled tight, the kind that runs quiet under fabric until it snags. She leaned back, closing her eyes. If Ellen had kept evidence of that old theft, she could ruin reputations. Reverend Hargrove's, perhaps. Mrs. Linton's husband's. Anyone tied to that missing money. Old sins, new fear. People forget that truth doesn't fade with time it waits. She looked again at the spool. The initials. They weren't random. They were a mark of ownership, or guilt. Ellen might have stitched something with that thread years ago. Something for the Reverend. A robe. A cloth for the altar. And maybe something was hidden within the lining. Miss Marple rose slowly, mind sharpening like a needle. She could see it now, the shape of desperation. Someone had come to retrieve what should never have been made. Not for greed, for fear. The letter had said, "Tonight." So the visit had been planned. Ellen had expected them. She'd left the door open, but the meeting ended in silence. No struggle, no shout, only stillness, as if one secret, after years of waiting, had finally run out of breath. Miss Marple looked out the window. Dusk was falling on the village roofs. Smoke curled from chimneys. The world going on as though no truth had stirred. But she could feel it. The pattern was no longer hidden. Threads from different years had found each other. And someone, somewhere, was desperate enough to hide again. Another visit, another cup of tea. This time, Miss Marple called upon Reverend Hargrove. The door opened slowly. He looked smaller than memory made him. Pale, uneasy. "Ah, Miss Marple," he said, his voice soft, dry. "What a surprise. You find me in poor health, I fear." "I only came to offer condolences," she said. Her tone light, kind, dangerous. He led her into the study. Books everywhere. Dust hiding guilt on the shelves. Tea already waiting. Prepared. Again. Polite smiles over boiling truth. They Saturday. Steam rose between them like a curtain. She noticed his hands long, thin, restless. They trembled faintly when he poured. The cup rattled once against the saucer. "Terrible business," he murmured. "Such a gentle soul. The Lord's will, perhaps." Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the desk. Neat stacks of envelopes. A drawer slightly ajar. A spool of thread peeking out. Red. She spoke softly. "Ellen worked for you once, did she not? For many years?" He nodded quickly. "Yes, yes. She helped with altar cloths, repairs. Fine hands." He smiled faintly. "Could mend anything." "Even reputations?" she asked. The question fell quiet like a pin dropped in the dark. The Reverend's smile froze. His fingers tightened around the teacup. "I beg your pardon." "Old cloth," Miss Marple continued. "Old debts. Some things don't stay buried, Reverend." A pause. Long enough for truth to tremble. He set the cup down carefully. Too carefully. "I see the years haven't softened your curiosity," he said. A forced laugh. It cracked halfway. "Curiosity preserves life," she replied. "Secrets, on the other hand." She let the sentence fade. He reached for a handkerchief, blotted his brow. No words came, only a sigh that carried memory. Miss Marple rose slowly. Her eyes brushed across the desk once more. A church ledger sat open. Blank pages. Except one. A single line written fresh. She leaned, reading upside down. "Donation to Mrs. Linton, £20. Her brow lifted slightly. "Such generosity, Reverend." He swallowed. "Charity, Miss Marple. Always charity." But the words stumbled out, heavy. She smiled. "Charity wears many faces, some quite nervous." He flinched, just enough for truth to show through. She turned to leave, hat in hand. "Forgive the intrusion," she said gently. "It's always enlightening to see old friends." He didn't answer, didn't move, only stared at the red spool on the desk, as if it burned. Outside, the church bell began to toll. slow, heavy, each strike echoing like a heartbeat. Miss Marple paused at the gate. The sound followed her down the lane, and she knew, without turning back, she had touched the nerve. Alone again. Silence filled the cottage like breath held too long. The world outside carried on a cart rolling, a kettle whistling, faintly in a neighbour's kitchen, but inside, Miss Marple's room had turned into a map of quiet logic. Notes spread like a quilt across the table. Pages of scribbles, names circled, dates crossed, and in between them her mind moved like a needle, threading meaning through fragments. She sat back, hands folded lightly in her lap. Every stitch led somewhere. Every word in that half-note whispered motive. Cannot forgive. The truth must what? Must end. Must be spoken. One missing line could hold the heart of it all. She closed her eyes. Ellen, gentle, practical, precise. Never reckless, never careless. So why leave her door open? Why let danger step in without alarm? The half-note, the initials, the red thread. Each one pointed to knowledge. Not panic. She had known her visitor, perhaps even pitied them. Miss Marple murmured softly, half to herself. R.V.H. The Reverend. Money. Letters. Fear. The Reverend's face had given him away, if not his words. And Mrs. Linton. Her trembling hand, her hidden spool. Between them sat something shared. Something neither dared name aloud. Old sin, she thought. The kind that doesn't fade, it waits for time to loosen tongues. Her eyes drifted to the window. Rain brushed the glass in light threads, like the world stitching itself in secrecy. She listened to it. Rhythm, pattern. Even storms told stories if one listened properly. She turned back to her papers. The letter fragments matched none of Ellen's handwriting samples. But the ink, deep brown, not black, had a slight fade near the edge. A fountain pen's leak. Old ink. Church ink. She reached for the church ledger she'd quietly borrowed from the vestry. Page after page of tidy script. And there it was. Same hand. Same pressure. Reverend Hargrove. He had written the letter, but not to Ellen. That was the question, who was her? Miss Marple breathed in slowly. Not the Reverend's wife she had passed years ago. Mrs. Linton's husband. Dead. So who stood to lose everything if the truth came out? She looked down at one of her older clippings, a funeral notice from 15 years before. The name caught her breath for half a second. Helen V. Hargrove. A daughter, buried in another parish. Never spoken of since. Her pen paused mid-air. Could it be? If Ellen had kept proof of that scandal, a hidden birth, a quiet payment, a name erased from record, then someone had every reason to fear exposure. Someone still alive. Someone desperate. She leaned back again, mind taut as thread. The truth was close, she could feel its shape, but one thread, still missing. Find that, she thought, and you find the truth. The envelope was old. Paper thin, edges yellowed, soft as ash. It had slipped unnoticed between the pages of Ellen's sewing journal. Quiet, hidden, patient. Miss Marple held it gently. The paper whispered when she moved it. Ink, dark, pressed deep by an unsteady hand. Old words written with fear, and something colder. She broke the brittle seal. The flap tore easily. A faint scent of musty linen drifted out the past, breathing once more. Inside lay 2 sheets, folded twice, one newer, one old. Bound by a pin, rusted with time. The first page spoke like a plea. My dear Ellen, keep this safe. They must never know. He promised her marriage, but gave her silence. If this is found, burn it, for all our sakes. The second page, darker. The ink heavier, letters pressed too hard. It was signed H.V. Hargrove, Helen, the daughter no one spoke of, the one buried far from home. Miss Marple read on, eyes calm, heart tightening. I cannot forgive him. The child is gone, and so is my name. Mother prays, father hides, but truth will not stay buried. One day it will return. The signature trembled to a close. a blot where tears had fallen long ago. Miss Marple let the paper fall softly onto the table. The sound was barely there, but heavy enough to change everything. So that was the secret Ellen had guarded. A daughter cast aside. A father desperate to erase his shame. A housekeeper who'd kept the proof. Years of silence stitched into obedience, until someone decided silence had lasted long enough. She stared at the pin that had held the pages together. Rust, age, and on its point a dark stain. Old blood, tiny, dried, but undeniable. Her mind moved quietly through time. Ellen must have received this letter years after the scandal. Perhaps from Helen herself, or from someone who wanted the truth buried again. The Reverend's tremor, Mrs. Linton's fear, the missing money. It all fit now, each a payment for quiet. Miss Marple folded the letter again, hands steady, face unreadable. The past had reached forward and killed its keeper. She placed the pages back into their envelope, pressed the seal closed with one finger. The candle beside her flickered. The flame leaned toward the open window. Wind whispered against the glass. The past, she murmured, writes its own murder. Outside, a bell tolled faintly from the church tower. Slow, unhurried, a sound of confession traveling through the night. Miss Marple didn't move. She only watched the flame steady itself again. The truth had surfaced. But one name the hand that delivered that final visit still hid in the dark, and that silence was about to break. Right and wrong blurred, lines smudged by years of fear and silence. Miss Marple sat by the dim light of her lamp, the old letter open before her. The words wavered slightly in the glow, as though the paper itself trembled under the weight of memory. Debt, fear, love. Each had its price, and no one in Street Mary Mead was truly free of the ledger. She looked at the handwriting again. Helen V. Hargrove. A daughter erased. A life unlived. A name buried by family pride. And a father who had called it mercy. The Reverend's tremor made sense now. He had preached forgiveness to others, while begging it from no one. Miss Marple closed the letter slowly. The sound of folding paper felt like the closing of a confession. It was not murder born of greed, nor anger, nor jealousy. This one came from something quieter, something human. Desperation to keep a sin buried long enough to fade. She stared at the spool of red thread beside her. It glowed faintly in the lamplight, almost alive. Red, blood, bond. It connected them all. Ellen had known too much. She had seen the hidden exchange, the quiet payments, the whispered name of the child that never should have been lost. She had kept it safe, not for power, but for justice. And justice, when it takes too long to arrive, begins to rot into vengeance. Miss Marple sighed softly. She thought of Mrs. Linton's trembling hands. The fear behind the tea smiles. The guilt of a woman who had helped cover another's shame, perhaps out of loyalty, perhaps out of love. But love, she knew, could bind as tightly as guilt. Right and wrong were not opposites tonight, only reflections. Each face in the mirror wore both. A father who sinned to protect, a friend who lied to comfort, a woman who died for truth. She rose from her chair and crossed to the window. The street outside was dark now. Lanterns glowed softly through lace curtains. Life went on, bread baked, fires lit, laughter carried. No one in the village would guess how heavy its silence had become. She thought of the Reverend's words earlier that day. God's will, perhaps. A man hiding behind heaven, afraid of his own prayer. Even the righteous fear their reflections when the truth begins to whisper. Miss Marple's hand rested lightly on the sill. She knew she would have to speak soon. Bring light where shadow had grown too thick. But light has a cost. It burns both the wicked and the kind. Some secrets destroy lives when told. Others destroy them when kept. Tonight, she could not yet decide which was mercy and which was murder. She turned from the window, her shadow falling across the table. Her eyes steadied. Someone would soon pay the price. But which sin, the old or the new, would justice choose first? Afternoon again. The same light, softer now. The air carried a hush, the kind that falls before truth begins to speak. Invitations sent, each written in Miss Marple's careful hand, each sealed with calm civility. No hint of accusation, no trace of alarm. They came as they always did when she asked. Mrs. Linton arrived first, face pale, gloves too tight, eyes darting toward the lane behind her. Reverend Hargrove followed soon after, hat in hand, steps heavy. He offered a greeting that trembled more than his smile. Then came Constable Brent, summoned quietly, without uniform, without fuss. He stood near the door, hat lowered, saying, "Little, just listening." That was enough. Chairs drawn close around the hearth. Tea poured, as ever. Biscuits untouched. No one knew why they were here, yet everyone feared they already did. Miss Marple moved about the room with gentle precision. A hostess, not an inquirer. Her hand steady, her tone light, but her eyes bright, watchful, unblinking, missed nothing. "Such dreadful weather for autumn," she said. "A chill that lingers even indoors." Her words floated like mist, harmless on the surface, sharp beneath. Mrs. Linton nodded too quickly. Yes, indeed. Terrible. Her voice cracked mid-sentence. Reverend Hargrove coughed into his handkerchief. "A season of reflection," he murmured. "Change comes for all things." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Indeed, Reverend, even for the past." The teacups rattled softly against their saucers, the only sound for several breaths. Then she placed the envelope, the old one, on the table, between them. It landed lightly, but the sound carried weight. No one spoke, eyes fixed on it. The pale paper seemed to hum in the silence. "I believe," she said, "we should discuss a letter, one that was meant to remain unread, and a name that was meant to remain forgotten." Reverend Hargrove's hand twitched. "Mrs." Linton's lips parted slightly. No words came. Constable Brent glanced between them, confusion mixing with suspicion. Miss Marple's gaze stayed steady. She didn't accuse. She invited. "There are threads that tie the living to the dead," she continued softly. "Some fray, some hold, and some—" She paused. Her eyes drifted to the red spool resting on the mantel. "Pull tighter with every lie." The clock chimed 4. Slow, deliberate strikes that filled the room. Each one a reminder that time, too, had a rhythm of confession. She looked around the small circle. "Before the sun sets," she said quietly, "we will know who entered Ellen's house, and why she never saw them leave." Mrs. Linton's gloved hands gripped together until the knuckles whitened. Reverend Hargrove's throat moved in a dry swallow. Miss Marple took her seat beside the fire. The kettle hissed once, as if the world itself exhaled. The threads were ready to pull, and this time, when they snapped, no one in the room would remain untouched. They gathered in silence. Fire low, cups untouched, the air itself seemed to wait. Miss Marple sat straight in her chair, hands folded neatly on her lap. Her eyes moved between them, the Reverend pale and trembling, and Mrs. Linton stiff as porcelain. The constable watched from the corner, saying nothing. No one dared to speak first. The only sound came from the clock, its ticking, slow, deliberate, final. Miss Marple began quietly. "Ellen Carter was not killed for money," she said, her voice gentle but precise. "She was killed for silence." Mrs. Linton flinched. The Reverend's eyes closed, just for a second. Miss Marple continued. "Years ago," she said, "a young woman named Helen Hargrove wrote a letter that should have been burned. It was not." She lifted the envelope from the table. It trembled faintly in her hand, though not from fear, from truth. She wrote of betrayal, of a promise broken, of a name erased, and of a child who vanished into shame. Reverend Hargrove's lips parted. No sound came. Miss Marple's gaze did not move. "She sent the letter to Ellen," she went on. "She trusted her. Ellen kept it. She thought it right to hold it to protect Helen's memory." The Reverend's voice finally broke the quiet. "You cannot know that. It wasn't defiance. It was plea." "I can," Miss Marple said softly. "The handwriting is yours." She placed the half-note beside the letter. The ink, the pressure, the style, all match your sermon notes from those years. He stared at the page, color drained from his face. I wrote it, he whispered, but not to her. It was never meant to be seen. Miss Marple nodded. And yet, it was. Ellen knew what it meant. She knew what you'd hidden and what Mrs. Linton helped you hide. All eyes turned. Mrs. Linton's breath caught. Her hands twisted her handkerchief until it tore. I never meant. Miss Marple's tone stayed calm. Your husband was dismissed from the bank to protect the Reverend's name. He took the blame for the stolen funds. You both accepted it, in silence. But Ellen discovered the truth when the ledger crossed her table for repair. The constable shifted slightly, the realization settling over him like dust. Mrs. Linton's voice cracked. She said she would tell the bishop. She said she'd make it right. And you went to her? Miss Marple said. Not to kill her, only to beg. But the heart can break faster than reason. The shock was too much. One raised voice, one hand on her shoulder, and she was gone. The room went utterly still. Only the fire moved, breathing low and steady. Miss Marple spoke once more, barely above a whisper. Truth, once threaded, cannot be unpicked. No one answered. Mrs. Linton wept quietly into her hands. Reverend Hargrove stared into the flames, as if they showed him what forgiveness looked like. Miss Marple rose slowly, gathering her notes, her voice calm and final. Sin may fade, she said, but the thread remains. The kettle hissed softly in the kitchen. The constable stepped forward at last, and as he did the clock struck 5. Each chime fell like judgment, soft, measured, and final. No cheers, no anger, only silence. The truth had done its work. It didn't shout. It simply stood there, patient and final. Mrs. Linton sat by the cold teacup, her gloves folded neatly on her lap. Tears slid quietly down her face, not of guilt, but of release. Years of silence had ended in a single hour. Reverend Hargrove stared into the dying fire. Ash shifted softly, red fading to grey. He looked smaller now, the weight gone from his shoulders, though peace had not yet found him. He whispered once, almost to himself, "She was my child." Miss Marple didn't reply. Some truths didn't need answering. They only needed to be heard. The constable stood by the door, hat in hand, no handcuffs, no raised voice. Just duty done in quiet understanding. Outside, dusk had settled across Street Mary Mead. The sky dimmed to lavender, the air heavy with the scent of rain yet to fall. The world moved on, unaware that a small corner of it had shifted forever. Mrs. Linton rose unsteadily, her voice low, frayed. I didn't mean for her to die. I only wanted her to burn the letter. Her hands trembled. She said she couldn't, said it was too late. Miss Marple nodded once. Sometimes, she said, truth chooses its own time. The Reverend's eyes closed. He spoke without looking up. She forgave me once. I failed her twice. He turned toward Miss Marple. Will you tell them at the church that I resigned? She met his gaze gently. There's no need, Reverend. They'll know soon enough. He gave a slow nod. Acceptance, not surrender. The kind that comes when nothing else remains to hide behind. The constable took Mrs. Linton's arm softly. She didn't resist. She walked as though in prayer. No struggle, no words, just the quiet rhythm of shoes across the floorboards. When the door closed, the house sighed. The fire crackled once more and fell still. Miss Marple stood by the window, watching the lane. Rain had begun at last. Thin drops, steady, cleansing. She thought of Ellen, of her patience, of her small, steady courage. Justice had come, though too late to comfort. But it had settled the dust. The letter lay on the table, again. Edges curled, ink faded. It no longer carried threat, only truth. A truth that had cost one life to reveal, and another to bear it. Miss Marple folded it once more, tucking it back into its envelope, her movements calm, reverent, the way one might close a prayer book. Justice rarely comforts. It doesn't heal, it doesn't forgive, but it clears the air, and sometimes that must be enough. She turned from the fire. The cottage door creaked open as the wind rose. Rain swept softly through the trees beyond. And as she reached for her coat, she whispered, "Peace comes quietly, when truth is finally heard." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. The sky deepened to grey, and one last drop of water slid from the roof, falling, perfectly timed, like a tear for the living. Morning light slipped through the curtains. Steam curled above a fresh cup of tea, calm, steady, alive with warmth. Another mystery ended, quietly, as most do. No noise, no glory, just truth, soft and certain, finding its place at last. Miss Marple sat by her window again. The world returned to ordinary rhythm. Knitting needles clicked softly. Outside, the village stirred a cart on the lane, a voice calling for milk, life carrying on as if nothing had broken. But something had shifted, something deep and unseen. And now Davis returns to you to this quiet moment by the fire, where stories meet the calm of truth. We've learned again that secrets can sleep for years, yet never die, and that justice, however slow, always finds its thread. So, take a breath, let the tea rest a little, because, as we say here on The Curious Case, truth cools slower than tea. 2 clues still rest on the table, the red spool of thread, and the old letter sealed in fading ink. Which one spoke to you first? The thread that tied the living to the dead, or the letter that whispered what silence could not? And where are you listening from tonight? Is your kettle already on, or are you saving this moment for morning light? Tell us below. We always love knowing where these quiet mysteries find you. Thank you, as always, for sharing this calm space, for sitting with us in the warmth between questions and answers. Each story reminds us that truth takes time, and that even the smallest clue can hold an entire life inside it. And so, as the fire softens and the tea cools, remember tomorrow, another kettle will boil. A light glows in Miss Marple's window, soft, steady, unwavering. The village sleeps beneath a pale silver sky, roofs dark, lanes still, only the clock in the church tower marking time. Inside, the teacup sits half full beside her, knitting steam fading, peace settling. A cat shifts on the windowsill, eyes half closed, as if guarding the last whisper of the night. The wind moves gently through the hedges, carrying away the last traces of the day's truth. And then, slowly, the light dims. The window fades to quiet. Only the ticking remains.